As the final part of the wedding rehearsal came to an end, the ballroom, filled with champagne-colored roses, still exuded an almost suffocatingly sweet fragrance. Eleanor L. Sterling walked out of the main hall with a light step. Her high heels clicked crisply against the marble floor. Remembering she had left her phone in the bridal lounge, she turned back to retrieve it. The entire corridor was immersed in a quiet hum, broken only by the low rumble of the central air conditioning and the distant, muffled laughter from the banquet hall. The door to the lounge was slightly ajar. Her hand had barely touched the brass knob when a voice from inside crashed over her head like a bucket of ice water. "Drew, you're getting married tomorrow. It hurts so much." It was Savannah's voice, whiny and soft, like a helpless child's. Elle's hand froze in midair. "What are you crying for?" Andrew Vance's voice was utterly carefree, carrying a hint of a chuckle, as if pacifying a spoiled toddler. "How many times do I have to tell you? Marrying Elle is just a temporary arrangement. The old man is holding those 5% trust fund shares over my head. If I don't marry her, I don't see a dime of it. Once the deal is done and the shares are vested, the spot as Mrs. Vance will be yours sooner or later." A low chorus of chuckles echoed in the room. It was Andrew's frat brothers and childhood friends. Someone teased, "Vance, you're unbelievable. You get a free wife to handle your mess, plus voting rights on a few $1 billion to boot." "Exactly," Andrew tossed off casually, as if discussing a trivial corporate merger. "Save your congratulations for the day Savannah and I tie the knot. That's going to be the real wedding." Savannah lowered her voice, adding a coquettish note. "Drew, isn't that a bit too cruel to Elle?" "Cruel?" Andrew scoffed. "She should be grateful. Spending a year and a half in the Vance family is something she can brag about for the rest of her life." The room erupted in laughter. No one found anything wrong with what had just been said. Elle's hand slowly slipped from the doorknob. She didn't push the door open. A sharp ringing suddenly pierced her ears, as if a firecracker had gone off inside her skull. Then, her stomach seized in a violent spasm. Nausea surged from the pit of her stomach to her throat. She instinctively covered her mouth. Her fingers were ice cold. In the dim light of the corridor, her face turned as white as a sheet of paper. She looked down. On her ring finger, a 6-carat diamond sparkled, catching the light. On the day Andrew proposed, he had dropped to one knee at Central Park and said, "Elle, please, be with me for the rest of my life." Back then, moved to tears, she thought she was the luckiest woman in the world. Now, she realized this ring was nothing more than a branding iron, marking her as Andrew Vance's temporary tool. And she, like an absolute fool, had mistaken it for love. Elle clenched her fist so hard her manicured nails dug into her flesh. The physical pain helped snap her out of her dizzy spell. She raised her head. The full-length mirror at the end of the hall reflected her image. The perfectly tailored nude-toned cocktail dress, the intricate updo specifically styled for tomorrow's grand event, and the vintage emerald necklace inherited from Andrew's late mother. It all felt like a sick joke mocking her. She stood perfectly still, breathing shallowly, like a suddenly frozen statue. The laughter behind the door continued. Savannah started crying again. Andrew went back to comforting her, and his friends kept cracking jokes. These sounds were like dull knives sawing at her nerves. But Elle didn't cry. Her eyes were bone-dry and ached, as if her tears had evaporated before they could even form. Instead, a bone-chilling cold seeped outward from her very marrow. 3 seconds. She gave herself exactly 3 seconds. Then, she turned around. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble, and she walked away without looking back. The corridor felt incredibly long as the self-deception of her last 2 years. When Elle stepped out of the Manhattan Hotel, the fierce night wind rushed at her, making the hem of her dress flutter wildly. She stopped on the steps and took a deep breath. The crisp autumn air sliced through her lungs like a razor. Slowly, she raised her hand and slipped the 6-carat diamond off her finger without a single ounce of hesitation. She squeezed the ring so tightly her knuckles turned white, then opened her clutch and tossed it inside like a used tissue. An Uber Black pulled up 5 minutes later. She got into the back seat and gave the driver the address to their Upper East Side penthouse. The car was warm, but her hands and feet felt like they had just been pulled from a freezer. She leaned back, watching the blurry neon lights of the city zip by. Her brain was operating with unprecedented, terrifying clarity. Andrew's words were lodged in her head like thorns. Marrying her temporarily. Temporary? What a beautiful word. She closed her eyes, and a faint, bitter smile touched her lips. Images flashed behind her eyelids like a slide projector. For Andrew, she had resigned from a key curatorial position at one of the top 3 global art agencies to fully dedicate herself to his private social life and the Vance family's philanthropic galas. For 3 consecutive years, she had managed the Vance Group's corporate art investments, earning them more profit than her cumulative salary would have been for decades. She used to wake up at 3 a.m. to simmer organic steel-cut oats and lay out medication for his chronic stress-induced gastritis. She had done every single one of these things with pure joy, simply because she thought this man loved her. How disgusting. How utterly, deeply disgusting. The car stopped outside the luxury high-rise. Elle swiped her keycard and took the private elevator up. The penthouse she stepped into was draped in imported white silk ribbons and floral arrangements. The living room was staged with props for tomorrow's post-wedding brunch. Custom monogrammed champagne flutes, fresh peonies she had meticulously selected herself. Everything was flawless to the last detail. Flawless, like an exquisite prank. She stood in the foyer, staring at these symbols of fake happiness for a long time. Then she dropped her clutch on the sofa and walked straight into the master walk-in closet. The entire left wall of the massive closet was lined with things Andrew had gifted her. Hermes Birkins and Kellys, Cartier bracelets, exclusive Chanel runway pieces, and limited edition Louboutins worth 6 figures combined. An entire wall suffocated by his so-called love. Elle looked at them, item by item. Her gaze was as cold and detached as a museum patron viewing outdated exhibits. Then, she pulled out her phone, found the contact saved as Attorney Hayes, and pressed call. It was 1:17 a.m. Attorney Hayes, it's Eleanor Sterling. I need you to draft a formal dissolution of the engagement immediately. Her voice was frighteningly calm, without the slightest tremor. I am waiving all rights to any shared assets or properties. I don't want a single cent from him. I need the finalized document ready by 8 a.m. tomorrow. There was a 3-second dead silence on the other end of the line. Miss Sterling, isn't your wedding tomorrow? There will be no wedding. She hung up. She walked into the guest bedroom and dragged out the battered vintage Samsonite suitcase she had brought with her when she first moved in. This suitcase had been with her since she finished her master's at Columbia University. The corners were scuffed, the zipper stuck a little, but it was something that truly belonged to her. She began packing, fast and precise. She took only her own clothes, her passport, her legal documents, and a few external hard drives. Those drives held all her curatorial projects, her network of industry contacts, and her portfolio. These were her real assets. As for Andrew's gifts, she didn't touch a single one. She methodically took down the designer bags, the diamond necklaces, the haute couture dresses, and the branded shoes, laying them in a neat, perfectly aligned pile in the center of the closet floor, like a retail display. Finally, she took the 6-carat ring from her clutch and placed it right at the very top of the multi-million-dollar heap. Done. She straightened up and looked at the pile of trash. A faint smirk graced her lips. It wasn't a smile of joy, but one of absolute mockery. These were all Andrew's props for his temporary marriage. She didn't need any of them. Nothing. Her phone buzzed. A text from Andrew. Elle, Savannah isn't feeling well. I'm taking her to the ER. Don't be late for the wedding tomorrow. Get some rest. Elle stared at the screen for 5 seconds. Not feeling well. Suddenly, her stomach violently flipped. The nausea returned, 10 times stronger than in the hotel corridor. She rushed to the master bathroom, dropping to her knees over the porcelain toilet, dry heaving for half a minute. Nothing came up. Only the bitter burn of bile scorched her throat. She slumped onto the cold marble floor, resting her forehead against her arms, breathing heavily. Finally, tears streamed uncontrollably from her eyes. Not out of sorrow, out of sheer disgust. Out of the humiliation of having her 2 years of sincere love reduced to a cheap punchline. She cried for exactly 2 minutes. Then, she decisively wiped her face, stood up, and walked to the sink. The mirror reflected a woman with bloodshot eyes and a pale face, looking entirely pathetic. She took a deep breath. Enough. This was the very last time she would ever shed a tear for Andrew Vance. She picked up her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she resolutely opened her contacts. She found Andrew Vance, held it down, and tapped block. Then Savannah, block. Then every single member of the Vance family, one by one. She systematically deleted her WhatsApp, her Instagram, her Facebook. Every social media account that could trace her location was wiped. Finally, she grabbed her suitcase, threw on her old camel trench coat, turned off the lights, and walked out of the penthouse filled with symbols of fake happiness. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind her, marking the end of a ritual. At 3:40 a.m., she checked into a generic business hotel near JFK Airport. Her suitcase sat against the wall. She sat on the edge of the bed, hugging her knees. The room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Thump. 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 Every beat reminded her, "You are alive. You are free. You no longer need to be someone's temporary anything." She pulled a hard drive from her bag and plugged it into her MacBook. The glow of the screen illuminated her pale face. She began organizing all her curatorial resources, art collector databases, and gallery contacts accumulated over the years. These were Eleanor Sterling's true weapons. Not a diamond from Vance, not a Birkin, not the title of a Vance family daughter-in-law. It was her own brilliant mind. She worked until 5 a.m. When exhaustion finally crushed her, she collapsed onto the pillows and closed her eyes. Tomorrow? No. Today. Today was her supposed wedding day. The thought flashed through her mind. Her lips twitched, but quickly settled into a flat line. Let them wait. Let them wait until all the imported roses wilt. Let them wait until the paparazzi from every major network point their long lenses at an empty bridal suite. Let them wait until the arrogant smirk is wiped clean off Andrew Vance's face. She closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. That night, she slept more soundly than she had in 2 years. The next day, the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into a floral palace. 100,000 white roses hung from the ceiling, and the crystal chandeliers refracted blinding light. The guest list was a who's who of the Eastern Seaboard. Prominent politicians, Wall Street titans, leading cultural figures, and elite socialites. The media zone was packed with journalists in full battle gear. This was the society wedding of the year. The union of the Vance and Sterling families was seen by the public as the ultimate alliance of two powerful corporate dynasties. At 9:30 a.m., with 30 minutes until the ceremony, Andrew Vance stood before a full-length mirror in the groom's suite, adjusting the platinum cufflinks of his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo. The man in the mirror was young, handsome, and radiating power. A faint, arrogant smile played on his lips. His chief of staff knocked and entered. "Mr. Vance, there's a slight issue in the bridal suite." Andrew didn't look up, adjusting his bow tie. "What?" The assistant hesitated. "The bride hasn't arrived yet." Andrew's hands paused. He raised an eyebrow casually. "Wasn't she supposed to be here at 8 a.m. for hair and makeup?" "Probably stuck in Manhattan traffic. Call her and tell her to hurry up." "I tried." The assistant's voice grew tense. "Her phone is off." Andrew finally turned around, annoyance flashing in his eyes. "Off?" "Yes, sir. Miss Sterling's phone has been off since 7 a.m. Andrew frowned. He instinctively grabbed his own phone, opened iMessage, and found his chat with Elle. The last message was his text from last night. "Don't be late for the wedding tomorrow. Get some rest." There was no delivered status. He tried calling. "The subscriber you have dialed is not available." His brows knitted together, but he quickly suppressed any unease with a cold sneer. "Tell her if she keeps throwing a tantrum, my patience will run out. She can forget about the corporate sponsorship for her new gallery project." The assistant opened his mouth but said nothing. "What are you standing there for? Go find her!" The assistant turned and practically ran out. 10:15 a.m. The bridal suite remained completely empty. Makeup artists, stylists, and bridesmaids were all present, exchanging nervous glances. Only the bride's seat was vacant. The custom Vera Wang wedding gown hanging on the rack quietly draped its train, as if waiting for someone who would never arrive. 10:25 a.m. The guests were getting restless. Whispers rippled through the pews. People kept checking their Rolexes. 10:30 a.m. The assistant, his face ashen, burst back into the groom's suite. Andrew was sitting on the leather sofa, legs crossed, still wearing his arrogant, she'll tire herself out and come back expression. But when he saw what his assistant was holding, his expression froze. It wasn't a phone, nor a text from Elle. It was a manila envelope. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a unilateral declaration of the dissolution of the engagement, stamped by a top-tier Manhattan law firm and signed personally by Eleanor Sterling. The wording was cold, legal, and absolute. I, Eleanor Sterling, voluntarily waive all property and financial rights associated with the engagement to Mr. Andrew Vance. As of this moment, no legal or personal relationship exists between us. The second was a screenshot from the penthouse's security camera. The timestamp read 2:40 a.m. It showed Elle, alone, walking out the door with a single, battered suitcase. Andrew shot up from the sofa. The papers in his hands trembled slightly. And her things? His voice suddenly turned hoarse. She took everything? The assistant lowered his head. The estate manager just checked. There isn't a single personal item of hers left in the closet. Only the things you gifted her. They are all stacked neatly on the floor. Andrew's pupils contracted violently. She left all his gifts? She didn't take a single thing, treating millions of dollars like discarded garbage? Impossible. Andrew crushed the lawyer's letter in his fist. He refused to believe it. The door flew open and Savannah rushed in wearing a pastel pink bridesmaid dress. Her face was the perfect picture of orchestrated panic and concern. Drew, everyone outside is asking why the bride hasn't walked down the aisle yet. What happened? Seeing Andrew's dark expression, she immediately ran to him and grabbed his arm, her voice soft and fragile. Drew, is Elle mad at me? I didn't mean to compete with her. I just love you so much. That's why I couldn't hold back my tears last night. Do you think she overheard something? Andrew said nothing. He stared intensely at the crumpled legal letter. His temples throbbed. She actually left. She left just like that, without asking questions, without throwing a fit, without giving him the slightest chance to explain. She cut him off as decisively as a surgeon amputating necrotic tissue. For some reason, his heart skipped a beat. It's not pain, Andrew told himself. It's not pain. It's the panic of losing control. It's the frustration of a ruined business plan. It's the fury of being outplayed by a woman I never took seriously. Find her, he ground out through clenched teeth. Activate every connection we have. Find Eleanor Sterling. But it was too late. Bulla Sporty 7 a.m. The ceremony was 15 minutes overdue. In the grand ballroom, the 300 elite guests had transitioned from whispers to open, loud discussions. Some Wall Street executives were already standing up to leave. The paparazzi, like sharks smelling blood in the water, were furiously snapping photos of the empty floral arch. The Vance wedding, and the bride, is a runaway. Word is the Sterling girl served him legal papers. What a massive humiliation. The news spread at the speed of light. The PR director for Vance Group sprinted into the lounge, sweating profusely. Mr. Vance! The media outside is going crazy! The chairman. The door banged open. Richard Vance, Andrew's father and the iron-fisted chairman of Vance Group, stood in the doorway, his face twisted in apocalyptic rage. Veins bulged at his temples. He pointed a shaking finger at Andrew and roared, "What the hell did you do?" Andrew opened his mouth. "Dad, I just got a call from the Sterlings." Richard's voice shook with a terrifying mix of fury and panic. Eleanor broke off the engagement herself. The Sterlings aren't going to stop her. Do you have any idea what this means? The joint ventures between our families, the trust fund conditions, our leverage, it's all gone to ash. He slammed his fist against a side table. A crystal vase tipped over and shattered on the floor. 300 guests. Live media coverage. The entire eastern seaboard is watching the Vance family become a laughingstock. Andrew, explain to me how you managed to drive her to this. Savannah, terrified, shrank into a corner, her face totally pale. She didn't dare make a sound. Andrew stood with his lips pressed tightly together. He couldn't say it. He couldn't tell his father what he had bragged about to his frat brothers last night. But deep down, he knew. Elle had heard everything. That was why she left so resolutely, without a single word of reproach. "I'll fix it." His voice was so hoarse it was barely recognizable. "Fix it?" Richard Vance sneered coldly, suddenly pressing a hand to his chest, swaying slightly. "You'd better fix it. Otherwise, you'll bear the consequences of losing those voting shares all by yourself." With that, he turned and stormed out, surrounded by a flurry of panicked assistants and the on-call medical team. In the grand ballroom, the majority of the guests had already dispersed. Beneath the empty archway, 100,000 white roses slowly began to wilt under the heat of the stage lights. It was supposed to be Eleanor Sterling's wedding, but she was no longer there. That evening, Andrew drove back to their Upper East Side penthouse. He didn't know what he was expecting. Maybe that Elle would suddenly walk out of the guest room with red, swollen eyes and start interrogating him, allowing him to say a few sweet words and smooth things over. Maybe she was sitting in the living room, ready to smash a few plates, cry, and throw a tantrum so he could hold her. He had even rehearsed his lines on the drive over. "What I said yesterday was just drunk talk with the boys. Don't take it seriously." He pushed the door open. The custom wedding decorations were still everywhere. The Mr. and Mrs. signs sat quietly on the mantelpiece. The peonies were drooping. The living room was empty. The bedroom was empty. The terrace was empty. He walked swiftly into the master closet, and he froze. The right side of the closet was completely barren. Where Elle's personal, understated clothes used to hang, there were only bare velvet hangers swaying slightly. And on the floor against the left wall, the items were meticulously stacked. Hermès bags, Cartier boxes, Chanel garments, Givenchy heels. Every item was perfectly aligned, and resting quietly on top of a black Birkin was the 6-carat diamond ring, glinting coldly. Andrew stood motionless, staring at the pile. He used to think these items were his gracious charity to Elle. Every time he gave her a bag or a necklace, she would hug him happily and say, "Thank you, Drew." He viewed it as a handout, a lubricant to make his tool work better. Now, all these things, stacked like a pile of expensive trash, screamed at him, "Your so-called charity isn't worth a dime." Suddenly, an overwhelming sense of suffocation gripped his throat. Andrew couldn't understand the feeling. It wasn't heartbreak. He assured himself it definitely wasn't heartbreak. It was the humiliation of a slap to the face, the panic of prey suddenly snapping its leash, the fury of realizing his absolute control was an illusion. He spun around, grabbed an antique Ming vase from the console table, and hurled it violently at the wall. Crash! Porcelain shards exploded everywhere. "Elle!" His roar echoed through the empty penthouse. The veins on his forehead popped. His eyes were bloodshot. "You think you can just run away?" He smashed a decorative bowl, then a framed photograph. The floor was covered in debris. He breathed heavily, cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He leaned against the edge of the table like a cornered beast. His phone rang. It was Savannah. "Drew, are you okay? I'm so worried about you. Should I come over? Please, don't be alone." Andrew stared at Savannah's name on the screen. Suddenly, those letters felt unbearably irritating. If Savannah hadn't been crying in the lounge yesterday, if he hadn't said those words in front of everyone to appease her, the thought barely formed before he brutally cut it off. It wasn't his fault. Elle was just being too dramatic. Hearing a few sentences and immediately blowing up the wedding? It was insane. "I'm fine," his voice rasped. "I will find her. She can't hide." He hung up and dialed a high-end private investigator. Then he called airline contacts, hotel executives, and banking insiders. He wanted to track Elle's every move. However, the answers he received, one by one, turned his blood to ice. "Mr. Vance, Miss Sterling's cell number has been terminated. Not turned off, canceled entirely. Her social media accounts are gone. Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, wiped clean. Banking sources say she wired all her personal funds to an offshore account late last night. We can't trace the endpoints. There's no record of her boarding any flights out of JFK, LaGuardia, or Newark. No Amtrak records either. Either she used an alias, or she went completely off the grid within the city." Every report was another slap to Andrew's face. She hadn't acted on impulse. She had executed a flawless exit strategy. In the moment she heard those words, with terrifying coldness and efficiency, She completely severed her existence from his, canceling numbers, deleting socials, moving assets, packing, sending the lawyer's letter. The entire process took less than 6 hours. She didn't grant him a single call, a single text, a single tear. She simply and cleanly vanished from his universe, as if she had never existed. Andrew slowly slid down the wall to the floor. Shards of porcelain dug through his tailored trousers into his skin. But he didn't feel the pain. He tilted his head back, staring blankly at the ceiling. An incomprehensible void in his chest was expanding rapidly, as if a living organ had been ripped out, leaving a bloody, gaping hole from which a freezing wind continuously howled. The fallout from the runaway bride was vastly more catastrophic than Andrew had anticipated. By Monday morning, his phone was blowing up, not with news of Elle, but with emergency reports from Vance Group executives. Mr. Vance, Vance Group stock is down 4 points in pre-market trading. Drew, the partners are calling about the wedding. What's the official PR line? Mr. Vance, the Sterling family just announced they are reviewing terms on the joint Manhattan real estate project. Andrew gripped his phone, sitting in the debris-filled living room. He hadn't slept for 2 days. His eyes were entirely bloodshot, and his head felt like it was being split by a sledgehammer. But what truly froze his marrow was an email from the board secretary at 10 a.m. Mr. Vance, the chairman has called an emergency board meeting for 1 p.m. Agenda: Asset restructuring and accountability regarding the severed Sterling alliance. Accountability. The word was a blade at his throat. Andrew closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. He knew his father wouldn't forgive him. The old man had nearly suffered a heart attack at the plaza. He had never seen such murderous disappointment in his father's eyes. Yet, Andrew stubbornly refused to admit fault. It was Elle's fault. She had acted radically. She hadn't even given him a chance to explain. He stood up. A piece of glass bit into his heel, but he ignored it, walking barefoot to the bathroom to splash cold water on his face. The mirror showed an exhausted stranger. Sunken eyes, a rigid jawline, cracked lips. His phone buzzed. Savannah. Drew, did you eat breakfast? I made you oatmeal. I'm bringing it over. Fine. He didn't have the energy to argue. At 1 p.m., in the glass-walled boardroom on the top floor of Vance Tower, the board of directors sat around the massive mahogany table. These gray-haired Wall Street sharks stared at Andrew with grim faces, looking at him like a dog that had just soiled the carpet. Richard Vance sat at the head of the table. His complexion was ashen, but his gaze was razor-sharp. In front of him was a stack of reports, topped by a stock chart painted in deep red. Since the wedding cancellation hit the news, Vance Group's market cap had evaporated by nearly $2 billion. Speak! Richard's voice was hoarse and icy. What happened? Andrew sat rigidly, his spine straight. His eyes flicked to the documents. His stomach clenched. Elle. I don't want to hear her name. Richard slammed his palm on the table. I am asking what you did to make the Sterling daughter run away without demanding a single cent. Do you think she needs our money? The Sterlings have their own empire. Silence hung heavy in the room. All eyes bore into Andrew. His lips parted, but no words came out. He couldn't confess to the board that he had called the marriage a temporary scam. Doing so would prove that he, the heir apparent, treated billion-dollar strategic alliances like frat house jokes. The direct consequences of the severed alliance began an older board member to the left, adjusting his glasses. First, the Sterlings have frozen our joint $400 million Hudson Yards development. Second, the family trust explicitly states that a stable marriage is a prerequisite for your control over the 5% voting shares. No wedding, no shares. He paused, staring at Andrew. Third, market confidence has tanked. If we don't have good news within the week, institutional investors will start dumping the stock. Under the table, Andrew's hands curled into tight fists. And lastly, another director chimed in with unconcealed irony. The entire network of art and cultural philanthropy that Eleanor Sterling built for our corporate image is paralyzed. Contacts with top-tier collectors, European galleries, museum boards, those were her personal relationships. She's gone, and that division is practically dead. Every word was a dull knife sawing at Andrew's ego. He couldn't take it. She was just doing administrative support. It wasn't that. Shut up. Richard Vance closed his eyes. His voice leaked out through clenched teeth. Effective today, leadership of the Asian Renewable Energy Acquisition is transferred to your uncle. Your executive signing authority is temporarily frozen at $500,000. When you fix this mess, you might get your power back. Andrew's pupils shrank. Frozen authority meant he was effectively sidelined from the core of Vance Group. Meeting adjourned. Richard stood up, pressing a hand to his chest, and walked heavily out of the room. The old foxes in their bespoke suits followed, some hiding faint smirks. Andrew was left alone in the massive boardroom. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over his face, but his eyes were entirely empty. With trembling fingers, he unlocked his phone and opened his photo gallery. He scrolled for a long time until he found a picture from 6 months ago. Elle was in the kitchen, wearing one of his oversized white t-shirts, her hair in a messy ponytail, turning to the camera with a warm, crescent-eyed smile as she cooked him dinner. He stared at it until the screen timed out. That evening, he truly realized how empty the penthouse was. Not just physically empty. It was a suffocating, dead silence that permeated every square inch. When Elle was here, the apartment was alive. The whistle of the kettle, the clicking of her keyboard from the study, her humming in the shower, her soft voice calling, "Drew, dinner's ready." Now, nothing. He opened the Sub-Zero refrigerator. Empty. It used to be constantly restocked. Elle meticulously planned his meals to ensure his stress-induced gastritis didn't flare up. Now, there were only 2 bottles of sparkling water and a yogurt that expired 3 days ago. He closed the door, feeling the familiar burning gnaw in his stomach. His phone rang. A FaceTime from Savannah. He answered. Savannah appeared on screen, fresh out of the shower, wearing a pink silk camisole. Tears glistened on her lashes. "Drew, are you home alone? Do you want me to come over? I can cook for you." "What can you cook?" Andrew rubbed his throbbing temples. Savannah blinked. "I can learn. Whatever you want. My stomach is killing me. Make some oatmeal." "Okay, I'll be there in 30 minutes. 40 minutes later, Savannah practically blew into the apartment. Rolling up her sleeves, she marched into the kitchen. Chaos ensued. Andrew sat in the living room listening to the disaster. Cabinet doors slamming, spice jars shattering, her yelling, "Where do you keep the oats?" An hour later, Savannah emerged with a bowl. Andrew looked down. The oatmeal was a thick, black, glue-like paste that smelled strongly of burnt carbon. Unidentifiable lumps floated in it. The acrid smell hit his nose, making him wince. "Drew." Savannah bit her lip, looking utterly pitiful. "I really tried. I didn't know it was so hard. I thought making oatmeal was just boiling water. Elle made it look so easy." Andrew stared at the blackened sludge, and an image of Elle flashed violently in his mind. Her oatmeal was always the perfect consistency, topped with fresh blueberries, a drizzle of Manuka honey, and a glass of warm water with his antacid pills waiting on the side. "Take your meds first. The oats will cool down perfectly by the time you're done," she would say. The memory was so vivid it felt like yesterday. His chest seized sharply. "It's not pain," he told himself again. "It's just the discomfort of a broken routine. Take it away." He turned his head. "I lost my appetite." Savannah froze, and the tears immediately spilled over. "Drew, do you hate me now? I know I'm not as capable as Elle, but I love you. Why are you being so cold to me? It scares me. I said take it away." Andrew suddenly yelled, jumping up. Dead silence fell over the living room. Savannah flinched violently, tears streaking her face. She didn't dare move. Andrew let out a harsh breath, turned away, and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Leave," his voice was rough. "I want to be alone." Savannah stood there for a moment, then quietly whispered, "Okay," grabbed her purse, and fled. When the door clicked shut, the apartment plunged back into the abyss of silence. Andrew sat on the sofa, staring at the burnt oatmeal. His stomach cramped so violently he had to double over. In the following weeks, Andrew's life began to visibly crumble. Without Elle managing the complex machinery of his existence, errors piled up exponentially. First, it was the social networking. Elle didn't just handle art investments. She managed the invisible web of Andrew's high society connections. Which board member's wife had a birthday? What gift to send? What specific vintage wine did the city commissioner prefer? how to arrange the seating chart at the annual charity gala so bitter rivals didn't sit together. All these critical micro details had been stored in Elle's brain. Now, Savannah eagerly stepped into the role, and the results were apocalyptic. In her first week, Savannah called the wife of a key Wall Street partner to arrange a lunch. Not only did she use the wrong first name, but she also butchered the prestigious surname. The woman called Andrew's office directly, dripping with old money disdain. It seems the new future Mrs. Vance doesn't even bother to do her homework. How embarrassing. Andrew had to personally grovel on the phone, losing immense face. In the second week, Savannah attended the charity committee luncheon, a covert intelligence gathering ring for the wives of New York's power brokers. Elle used to dominate these events with effortless grace, extracting vital corporate gossip for Andrew. Savannah showed up draped head to toe in flashy designer logos. She didn't know who was married to whom, who was feuding, or what topics were taboo. Worse, she complained loudly to the table. Drew is having such a hard time. It's all because of that Elle girl running away. By the next morning, the quote had circulated through the entire Upper East Side. Vance's new mistress is publicly trashing his ex-fiancée at a charity luncheon. Absolutely classless. Has the Vance family standard dropped this low? The Vance Group PR department worked until 3 a.m. trying to kill the gossip column pieces. The stock, after a brief stabilization, began sliding again. Andrew sat in his office, staring at screenshots of the PR disaster, his temples throbbing violently. He yelled at Savannah over the phone for the first time. "I sent you there to network, not to make us a laughingstock. Do you have anything inside your head?" Savannah sobbed through the receiver. "Drew, I didn't know it was so complicated. How did Elle remember all of that? I'm not her. I can't do it. She had a master file." Andrew hissed. A complete relationship matrix of every family, their preferences, and their taboos. It was all in a file. He stopped abruptly. That file had been on Elle's personal laptop. She took it with her. Of course she took it. It was her intellectual property, the result of her meticulous labor. Andrew slumped back in his Herman Miller chair, closing his eyes. That name, like a tightening noose, squeezed his throat. Elle. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time a crisis erupted, he thought, if she were here, this wouldn't have happened. Every time he returned to the dead penthouse, he thought, if she were here, the lights would be on. These thoughts drove him insane, breeding a toxic mix of fury and desperate, sleepless yearning. He wanted her back. Not out of love, he rationalized, but because I need her. She was his tool, and he was accustomed to how flawlessly it worked. Only now that the tool was gone did he realize he was completely dependent on it. And the most terrifying part, he didn't even know where she was. By the third week, Andrew broke. Sitting in his darkened office, he opened iMessage. The chat history was still there, even though her number was dead. He scrolled back up through the months. Drew, your oatmeal is on the stove. Don't forget to eat. Drew, it's the CFO's wife's birthday tomorrow. I left the Baccarat crystal vase wrapped on the console table. Drew, are you working late again? Come home soon. I miss you. Gentle, like a quiet stream. He used to barely glance at these texts, finding them clingy and unnecessary. Now, he stared at those 3 words, I miss you. His chest tightened so painfully he could barely breathe. His fingers trembled as he typed a message. Elle, if you come back, we can have the wedding on your terms. I beg you. Let's just meet. He hit send. Message failed. Not delivered. He pressed try again. Not delivered. He pressed it again and again. Every red exclamation mark was a brutal slap. Andrew violently hurled his phone across the room, where it shattered against the mahogany wall. He gripped the edge of his desk, panting heavily, cold sweat dripping down his face. A horrifying realization dawned on him. From the moment she left the rehearsal to this very day, 3 weeks later, Elle hadn't sent him a single word. No reproaches, no demands for closure, no. How could you do this to me? Nothing. She had evaporated, completely, cleanly, without a single shred of regret. This dead silence was vastly more terrifying than any hysterical screaming match. If she had come back and thrown a fit, he would have had a lever to pull, a chance to prove he cared. But she didn't care. She absolutely did not care. The tender, devoted Elle who texted him, "I miss you every night," was dead, as if she had never existed. Meanwhile, Savannah's position was rapidly deteriorating. She wasn't entirely stupid. She knew she was losing her grip. With Elle gone, Savannah was shoved into the unforgiving spotlight of New York high society, universally branded as the cheap homewrecker. Even the Vance family staff looked at her with thinly veiled disgust. But as long as Andrew needed her, she could feign confidence. Lately, though, Andrew was ice cold. Before the disaster, even when he claimed the marriage was a business deal, he treated Savannah with indulgent affection, buying her jewelry, taking her to exclusive clubs. But now, he ignored her texts and snapped at her whenever they were in the same room. Savannah's anxiety hit a boiling point. One afternoon, wandering through Bergdorf Goodman, she spotted an exclusive Oscar de la Renta evening gown. It was the perfect dress for an upcoming, highly publicized global art gala. Driven by a desperate need to prove she belonged, she used Andrew's black Amex card to buy it. As the cashier swiped the card, a prominent socialite standing nearby let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Oh, isn't that the Vance family's little stray?" The woman drawled, looking Savannah up and down. "The homewrecker is trying to play dress-up on the big stage. You chased away someone with Eleanor Sterling's pedigree, and now you have the nerve to parade around in haute couture?" Savannah went pale. "Excuse me? You heard me," the woman sneered. "The whole city knows how you crawled into that bed. It's frankly revolting." Savannah's hands shook. She snatched the shopping bag and fled without looking back. But the fallout was worse than she imagined. That evening, the socialite posted a blind item on her private, elite-only Instagram story. "Spotted a certain tacky mistress maxing out her sugar daddy's card on a gown today. Doesn't she know you can't buy class?" By morning, the screenshot was in every Upper East Side group chat. Vance Group's PR was once again in agonizing damage control mode. When Richard Vance, recovering from his near heart attack in his suite at Mount Sinai Hospital, saw the Page 6 article, his blood pressure monitor began to beep wildly. The doctors had ordered absolute calm, but his worthless son was driving daggers into his heart daily. "Call Andrew," he wheezed to his nurse. 30 minutes later, Andrew walked into the VIP hospital room. Richard was propped up on pillows, his face sallow but his eyes piercing. He looked at his son hollow-cheeked, unshaven, exhausted, and the rage flared again. "That Savannah girl," Richard commanded, his voice like grinding stones. "Get rid of her." Andrew stood at the foot of the bed, hands shoved deep into his pockets, lips sealed. "If you don't throw her out, don't even dream of getting your executive powers back." Richard closed his eyes, out of breath. "She is a walking humiliation to this family. Dad. Savannah. She's what?" Richard's voice spiked dangerously, clutching his chest as he groaned in pain. Once he caught his breath, he hissed. "What can she actually do for you? Can she stabilize the stock? Secure a merger? Negotiate with the board? Tell me, out of everything Eleanor Sterling did, what has this cheap knockoff managed to accomplish? You risked the entire Vance empire for a useless piece of trash." The heart monitor began to wail. The medical team rushed in. "Mr. Vance, you cannot stress the patient." The attending doctor barked at Andrew. Andrew stood frozen. His lips moved, but he had no argument. He turned and walked out. The blinding fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor hit him. He leaned heavily against the wall, tilting his head back. His Adam's apple bobbed. His father's words pounded in his skull like nails. Out of everything Eleanor Sterling did, what has she managed to accomplish? The words hurt more than any curse, because they were the absolute truth. Andrew was finally forced to confront the reality he had been running from. Elle was never just a temporary wife or a disposable tool. She was the mortar holding his entire crumbling life together. She was his safety net, the one person who always covered his blind spots. And he had lost her. No, he hadn't just lost her. He had shoved her out the door with his own two hands. That night, returning to the penthouse, Andrew did two things. First, he called an elite global intelligence firm and tripled their retainer. "I don't care what methods you use. I want Eleanor Sterling's location within the month." Second, he found a silk scarf Elle used to wear. It had been left on a hook behind the closet door, somehow missing the pile on the floor. It still carried the faint scent of her simple jasmine laundry detergent, lacking any heavy, expensive perfume. Andrew clutched the scarf in his hand and sat in the pitch-black living room until dawn. He refused to admit he was thinking about her, but his body was painfully honest. His stomach cramped agonizingly, not from hunger, but because the person who instinctively brought him warm water and medication was gone. His body, in the most primitive way, was mourning what he had destroyed. As the New York skyline turned from black to bruised purple, then to pale gray, Andrew looked down at the soft green silk in his hands. His lips moved, as if wanting to say something, but all that came out was silence. A long, infinite silence. Meanwhile, halfway across the country, Eleanor Sterling was rebuilding her empire. On the third day after leaving Andrew, she had rented a charming, sunlit brownstone studio in the West Village. It was small, just 600 square feet, but had a massive bay window looking out over a quiet street lined with sycamore trees. She decorated it simply. Her favorite art prints on the walls, a potted monstera on the desk, and shelves neatly stacked with curatorial catalogs she had collected since grad school. This was her sanctuary. No Andrew, no Vance family, just her and her ambition. For the first few days, she didn't stop moving. By day, she reactivated her old industry contacts, updated her portfolio, and organized her network. By night, she worked on independent curatorial proposals until dawn. She didn't allow herself to pause, because the moment she did, the memories would crawl back. Andrew's arrogant smirk. Savannah's fake whining. The frat boy laughter. Whenever those echoes surfaced, the severe nausea returned. But she never cried. She had shed her tears during those 2 minutes on the bathroom floor. That was the last mercy she would ever grant Andrew Vance. In place of sorrow came a cold, almost obsessive hyperfocus. Like a rebooted supercomputer, she poured all her bandwidth into her career. She reached out to global art collectors, gallery owners, and museum directors, people whose relationships she had allowed to cool while playing the obedient Vance fiancé. To her mild surprise, the response was overwhelmingly enthusiastic. Several prominent European gallery directors told her bluntly, we always thought you were wasting your genius on Vance's corporate vanity projects. You belong on the main stage." Reading those emails, the corners of her lips curled up. Yes. She had her own stage. She always had. She had just hidden her light under a bushel named Vance. For 2 years. For a man who didn't even respect her, she had buried the prime of her career. The familiar nausea bubbled up, but she shoved it down. Don't think about it. The old Eleanor died at the door of that bridal lounge. The one who lived is only moving forward. On her 18th day in the West Village, she received a phone call. The caller ID showed a number saved in her contacts, but one she had never dialed. It was the direct line to the North American executive office of Pierce Capital. Pierce Capital, a name spoken in hushed, reverent tones on Wall Street. It wasn't just a hedge fund. It was the ultimate apex predator of the global financial market. The founder and CEO, Julian Pierce, was an enigma. He rarely appeared in public, operating with a ruthless stealth that bordered on myth. But every move he made altered the tectonic plates of the global market. Elle answered. The managing director's tone was exceptionally polite. Miss Sterling, we've been following your recent independent movements. Regarding the launch of Pierce Capital's flagship cultural initiative in Miami, Mr. Pierce would like to meet with you personally. When would you be available? Elle gripped the phone, her knuckles whitening slightly. The Miami Project. It was the crown jewel of Pierce Capital's real estate portfolio this year. A multi-billion-dollar development aiming to create the largest integrated art, tech, and luxury commercial hub in North America. If successful, it would completely redefine the global art market landscape. And they were coming to her. Yes, her voice was steady, devoid of excess emotion. Name the time and place. Hanging up, she sat in her studio, watching the dappled sunlight filter through the sycamore leaves onto her desk. She looked down at her bare ring finger. The faint tan line left by the 6-carat diamond was already fading. Soon, it would vanish completely, just like that relationship. Just like that man. Gone forever. She smiled, closed her MacBook, and walked to her closet to select a suit for tomorrow's meeting. Act 2 of Eleanor Sterling's life had officially begun. Week 4 began with a deafening slap to Andrew Vance's face. During a tense board meeting, Andrew's uncle, the vice chairman, slammed a preliminary bidding report onto the table. Look at this, his uncle spat, displaying the ruthless edge of an old corporate predator. We lost the bid for the Chicago Urban Renewal Project. Do you know who beat us? Andrew glanced at the cover of the report. His pupils contracted. Pierce Capital. Yes, Pierce Capital. His uncle sneered coldly, leaning back in his chair. And do you know why we lost? Because their proposal included an unprecedented, fully integrated cultural IP infrastructure. It was the deciding factor for the city council. Our arts division hasn't produced a single viable proposal since your ex-fiancé left. Those consultants you hired to replace her don't even know the basics. Her shadow was everywhere. Andrew clenched his fists under the table, but stayed silent. After the meeting, alone in his office, he managed to pull up a leaked executive summary of Pierce Capital's winning bid. He flipped to page 37. At the bottom, in small print, Lead Cultural Architect, E.S. Eleanor Sterling. His hands began to shake violently. She hadn't just disappeared. She had defected to Pierce Capital, Vance Group's most terrifying apex competitor. Andrew hurled the binder across the room, jumped up, and began pacing frantically, breathing hard. Terrifying scenarios played out in his mind. When did she contact Pierce Capital? Before the wedding? After? Was this premeditated treason, or a spontaneous pivot? He forced himself to calm down. Based on the timeline, she must have reached out after she left. But the speed becoming the lead architect of a multi-billion-dollar project in less than a month? What did that mean? It meant her industry leverage was astronomically higher than he had ever comprehended. It meant the administrative support he had so openly mocked was actually a rare goldmine asset that the entire market was fighting for. It meant he had been catastrophically wrong from day one. He thought she was an accessory to his life. She was the actual engine, and he had personally handed her over to his greatest rival. That night, Andrew sat in the back of his chauffeured SUV, ordering his driver to Circle L's old haunts, the independent bookstore in Soho, the little French bistro they used to frequent, a specific quiet street in the village. He circled them 3 times. Of course, he didn't see her. She no longer existed in his past. Finally, as the car idled under a streetlight, Andrew pulled out his phone and stared at her contact name. He opened the Notes app and began to type slowly. Where are you? Why didn't you give me a single chance to explain? You could have yelled at me, at least. He stared at the glowing words for a long time, then highlighted the text and deleted it all. He threw the phone onto the seat, leaned back, and closed his eyes. The passing neon lights washed over his face, flickering like a dying star. Meanwhile, Savannah's situation was imploding. Following the Bergdorf Goodman incident, she was entirely blacklisted by the Elite Wives Club. Invitations she sent out were met with deafening silence. In group chats, her messages killed conversations instantly. Even sales associates who used to fawn over her now looked right through her. Her panic bred fatal mistakes. Desperate to prove she was still the future Mrs. Vance, she secretly used Andrew's corporate card to buy an $80,000 emerald necklace. She thought wearing it to the next event would shut everyone up. Andrew's face when he saw the fraud alert was something Savannah would never forget. It wasn't rage. It was a cold, dead exhaustion. Return it, he said, staring right through her. Drew, I said return it. Savannah bit her lip, tears welling up immediately. You won't even let me spend a little money now? Elle spent 10 times this much and you never said a word. Every dollar Elle spent generated $10 in corporate goodwill and investor relations, Andrew stated, his voice like freezing rain. What do you generate? The words hit her like a physical blow. Savannah stepped back, her face turning chalk white. Are you comparing me to her? Her voice trembled. Drew, you said you didn't love her. You said you loved me. You said you'd marry me as soon as you got the shares. Enough. Andrew stood up, grabbing his Tom Ford overcoat. His voice was as cold as steel tracks in winter. I don't have the patience to argue with you about this right now. The door slammed in Savannah's face. Left alone in the massive penthouse, her tears finally spilled over. She looked down at a gold Cartier bracelet Andrew had bought her months ago. It used to be her ultimate trophy, proof that she had won. Now, it felt as flimsy as a straw about to snap. She was terrified. She was terrified Andrew didn't need her anymore. But what terrified her more was the dawning realization that the woman he truly needed had never been her at all. Eleanor Sterling first met Julian Pierce in the top-floor conference room of Pierce Capital's Manhattan headquarters. The space was minimalist, almost monastic, no superfluous decorations, just floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park and a massive slab of black marble serving as a table. Spread out on the marble was her master proposal for the Miami Global Arts Hub. It was a dense, brilliant prospectus, the result of 2 weeks of sleepless nights. She wore a navy blue tailored dress, her hair pulled back into a sleek chignon, her makeup refined but understated. She stood by the projector, presenting to a group of senior partners. The art consumer market in North America is undergoing a structural paradigm shift. The traditional gallery model has hit a ceiling. We need a purely experiential asset architecture that transitions high art from mere collection to immersive consumption while leveraging its function as a financial derivative. Her voice was crisp and authoritative. Her data was accurate to the decimal. Her logic bulletproof. The senior partners, notoriously brutal men who hated having their time wasted, unconsciously sat up straighter. Yet, Elle's gaze never once fell on the man sitting at the far end of the table. Julian Pierce, 34 years old, the absolute sovereign of Pierce Capital. He sat in the shadows of the far corner, wearing a dark charcoal dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to his forearms. A vintage, unidentifiable mechanical watch rested on his wrist. His facial features were sharp, as if carved from marble, and his eyes, in the cool light of the room, were a piercing amber. He had been watching Elle since she walked in. It wasn't a predatory or evaluating stare. It was a deeply restrained, intensely analytical observation. He was looking at her the way one studies a priceless, newly discovered artifact, calm, focused, and vibrating with sharp interest. Elle finished her presentation. The room was silent for 3 seconds before a smattering of genuine applause broke out. The partners murmured their approval. The managing director moved to officially conclude the meeting when a voice drifted from the end of the table. "Stay." Just one word. The voice was low, possessing a natural magnetic gravel. It wasn't loud, but it carried a penetrating gravity that was impossible to ignore. The room instantly fell dead silent. Julian Pierce stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, well over 6'2", and the moment he stood, an unspoken but overwhelming aura of power radiated from him. He walked slowly toward Elle's end of the table, his leather Oxfords clicking rhythmically against the floor. Taking the cue, every other executive quietly filed out of the room. The heavy door clicked shut. They were alone. Elle stood her ground, tilting her chin up slightly to meet his gaze. Her face was calm, her posture perfectly straight. She knew exactly who was standing in front of her. Julian stopped about 3 feet away. He looked down at the sprawling blueprints and financial models. "The proposal is flawless," he said. "No fake corporate pleasantries, just mathematical assessment. Better than I anticipated." "Thank you." Elle gave a slight nod. Julian didn't respond immediately. His gaze lingered on her face for 2 seconds, noting the faint shadows under her eyes and the slight pallor of her lips. Without a word, he walked over to a concealed built-in credenza, opened a warming drawer, and pulled out a sleek ceramic thermos. It didn't contain coffee or scotch, but warm, frothy oat milk matcha. He placed the cup on the table directly in front of her. "Your body fat percentage is critically low, and you look exhausted," he stated. His tone as even as if reading a quarterly earnings report. "High-intensity cognitive labor requires baseline caloric fuel. Drink it, then go home." Elle stared at the steaming cup, momentarily stunned. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had noticed her physical condition. During her 2 years with Andrew, he never once noticed if she had eaten or slept. To him, she was a perpetual motion machine, always ready to serve. Yet this stranger, the most feared man on Wall Street, took one look at her and instantly diagnosed her fatigue. Her throat tightened. She picked up the cup. The heat seeped into her palms. "Thank you," she said, her voice a fraction softer, carrying a microscopic tremor. Julian gave a curt nod, stepping back and slipping his hands into his pockets. "Miss Sterling." "Yes?" The Pierce Capital Miami Initiative, a $30 billion portfolio, is officially in your hands as of today." He paused, locking his amber eyes directly onto hers. His voice dropped an octave, resonating with quiet conviction. "You deserve more than just respect." Elle gripped the warm ceramic cup. She looked at this man. There was no arrogant condescension in his demeanor, no patronizing pity, and absolutely no implication that a woman couldn't handle the pressure. He simply recognized her sheer competence as an equal and instantly converted his trust into absolute raw power. $30 billion. She had never touched a fraction of that at Vance Group. Not because she wasn't capable, but because Andrew Vance never gave her the chance. To Andrew, she was a glorified assistant meant for grunt work. Julian Pierce had just handed her the entire kingdom. Elle's heart gave a strange, powerful jolt. It wasn't a flutter of romantic infatuation. It was something far deeper. It felt as though a heavy iron door that had been locked for years was suddenly kicked open, and the blinding rush of sunlight made her dizzy. "I will deliver," she said. Her voice was ironclad, her eyes burning with sudden, fierce light. Julian Pierce watched the fire ignite in her eyes. The corners of his mouth twitched upward. It wasn't a full smile, but a subtle softening, like a warm current moving beneath a frozen ocean. "I know," he said. Over the next 2 months, Elle buried herself in the Miami project. Leading a hand-picked strike team, she built the entire infrastructure from the ground up: architectural layouts, curatorial acquisition, luxury brand partnerships, and global PR strategy. She personally oversaw every brutal detail. She was sleeping 4 hours a night, yet physically, she was thriving. It wasn't the frantic, toxic adrenaline of her past. It was the pure, radiant vitality of a woman operating in her ultimate element. Her eyes were bright, her complexion glowing. She was still slender, but a new, unbreakable confidence laced her voice. A confidence wholly independent of any man or family title, rooted entirely in her own staggering competence. Julian was incredibly busy. His schedule was segmented into 5-minute intervals. Yet, every 3 to 5 days, he appeared at her project war room. Not as a micromanager checking on his investment, he never once questioned her professional judgment. He always arrived quietly. Sometimes, after 6 hours of back-to-back vendor negotiations, Elle would find a premium Wagyu grain bowl and a hot tea waiting on her desk. She'd look up and see Julian standing near the door, reading a dossier, looking as if he just happened to be passing by. "Eat, then continue," he'd say, before walking out. Sometimes, when she was sitting in the hallway looking visibly drained, he would exit a nearby meeting, his eyes resting on her for a fraction of a second to assess her state. He would then casually tell his assistant, "Push my next call back an hour. Give Miss Sterling's team a mandatory recess." He never crossed the line. He never acted like a savior. At first, Elle didn't read into it. She viewed Julian as an apex pragmatist. Protecting the physical health of a key asset is simply protecting the investment. But her perspective shifted one night during the final sprint before the Miami launch announcement. She stayed in the West Village studio until 2 a.m., fine-tuning the architectural lighting schematics. Everyone else was gone. A quiet knock on the door startled her. She looked up. Julian stood in the doorway. At 2 a.m., he wore a dark bespoke suit over a white shirt, the top buttons undone, looking like he had just left a high-level political fundraiser. He held a discreet paper bag from an exclusive 2-4-hour Manhattan culinary club. "Still here?" he stated, rather than asked. It was as if he already knew. Elle blinked, surprised. "Mr. Pierce, are you passing through?" He walked in, setting the bag on her desk. Inside was a container of hot, soothing ginger scallion congee and a box of Pierre Hermé macarons. "Your chief of staff mentioned you skipped dinner." Elle stared at the warm food, and a lump formed in her throat. Not entirely out of being touched, but from a bizarre sense of déjà vu. She remembered the countless times she had woken up in the middle of the night to simmer oats and portion out antacids for Andrew. No one had ever done it for her. She was always the caretaker. And now, the most powerful man in New York City had taken a detour at 2 a.m. just to bring her a hot meal. "Thank you," she managed, her voice a little thick. Julian didn't sit. He stood by her desk, his gaze dropping to the lighting schematics on her dual monitors. He studied them for 10 seconds before saying, "The color temperature in Zone 3 can drop half a Kelvin. The warmth will conflict with the cool tones of the central installation." Elle froze. analyzed the screen, thought for 2 seconds, and nodded. You're absolutely right. She adjusted the parameters. A faint twitch of approval touched Julian's lips. Wrap it up soon, he said, turning toward the door. He paused without looking back. My driver is waiting downstairs. Don't reject the ride. It's on my way. The door clicked shut. Elle stared at it for a long time. Then she looked down, picked up a macaron, and took a bite. Sweet. Warm and sweet. She ate one, then another, until she finished the entire meal. Riding home in the back of Julian's armored Maybach that night, she watched the city lights blur past. Her reflection in the tinted glass looked different. The deep exhaustion was still there, but her lips had color again. She suddenly remembered the words Julian had spoken at their first meeting. You deserve more than just respect. She was beginning to think he meant it literally. The official launch gala for the Pierce Capital Miami Hub was scheduled for the most highly anticipated weekend of the fall season, hosted at the Museum of Modern Art in NYC. It was Pierce Capital's first massive public cultural foray. The scale of investment, the caliber of global brands, the weight of the guest list, it was the most exclusive event of the decade. Tickets couldn't be bought. Entry was strictly by gold-embossed invitation only. Andrew Vance spent 3 weeks calling in every single favor he had left just to secure a +1 invite. Not because he cared about the art. He knew the CEO of Pierce Capital would be there, and to save the sinking Vance Group, he desperately needed to network with the true gods of Wall Street. But he had a second, burning motive. His private investigator confirmed Eleanor Sterling was the lead architect of the project. She would be there. Just thinking about seeing her made Andrew's heart hammer against his ribs, a sickening cocktail of anticipation, terror, fury, and an agonizing, unquenchable thirst. Over the last 2 months, Andrew had lost 15 pounds. His cheekbones jutted out. His jawline was a razor edge of tension. His eyes were permanently sunken. He looked gray and hollow, yet he armored himself in a bespoke tuxedo, making sure his Patek Philippe watch and platinum cufflinks were flawless. Savannah, naturally, insisted on accompanying him. She had spent 3 days prepping. A new blowout, a new dress, this one she bought herself. A high-end designer knockoff since her access to Andrew's wealth was cut off. She twirled in front of the mirror, offering a timid smile. Drew, do I look pretty? Andrew gave her a dead, vacant glance. Let's go. The MoMA facade had been transformed into a moving digital art installation, glowing like a sapphire in the heart of Midtown Manhattan. A 50-meter red carpet led to the entrance, flanked by a wall of screaming paparazzi. Flashbulbs detonated continuously as Wall Street titans, tech billionaires, politicians, and A-list celebrities walked the carpet. Andrew walked in with Savannah on his arm. From the moment he crossed the threshold, his eyes began scanning frantically like radar. Searching every corner, every face, every silhouette. He didn't see her. His stomach plummeted, but he forced himself to grab a flute of Dom Perignon and attempt to network. However, the elite crowd looked at him with polite, icy distance. The stench of the runaway bride fiasco still clung to him. None of these seasoned sharks wanted to board the sinking ship that was Vance Group. Savannah gripped his arm tightly, her smile looking like it was stapled to her face. She felt the judgmental stares, the mockery, the disdain, but she held her chin up, repeating a mantra in her head. I am Andrew Vance's woman. I belong here. At 9 p.m., the ambient lighting in the massive atrium suddenly dimmed. A single brilliant spotlight pierced the darkness, illuminating the grand staircase like a divine pillar of light. The low hum of the crowd died instantly, replaced by a ripple of whispers spreading outward. She's here. Who is that? My God, look at that dress. Andrew whipped around. Descending the stairs, bathed in the spotlight, was a woman. She wore a custom, obsidian black Tom Ford evening gown. It clung to her perfectly, an architectural masterpiece of silk and velvet. A plunging neckline revealed her sharp, elegant collarbones, while the fabric drank the light, shimmering with dangerous sophistication. Her hair was swept into a flawless, minimalist chignon, held by a single geometric silver pin. No heavy diamonds. No flashy logos. She didn't need them. She herself was the most blinding jewel in the room. Cold, aristocratic, unconquerable, like a freshly unsheathed sword. The moment Andrew recognized the face, the blood in his veins froze solid. His brain short-circuited. A second later, every nerve ending exploded. His ears rang, his lungs seized, his fingers went numb. The champagne flute in his hand tilted, spilling onto his tuxedo cuff. But he didn't even notice. He was completely paralyzed. It was Eleanor Sterling, but it wasn't the Elle he remembered. The Elle in his memory was always soft, offering warm smiles and gentle tones, dressing elegantly but never to outshine him. She always stood half a step behind him, a beautiful, compliant shadow. The woman commanding the room right now radiated an aura he had never seen. It wasn't arrogant swagger. It was the terrifying, undeniable gravity of a sovereign who controlled her own destiny. She was leaner, sharper, but her spirit had fundamentally mutated. Her eyes were piercing, her posture lethal, her stride unyielding. She was no longer the cautious, obedient Vance fiancé. She was Eleanor Sterling, unapologetically, completely herself. The lights came back up. The MC on stage announced the official opening, but no one was listening. Every eye was glued to Elle. The jaded socialites and billionaires were genuinely awestruck. The women scrutinized the flawless cut of her dress. The men whispered furiously to their aides, demanding to know who she was. "That's the lead architect for Pierce Capital's Miami project," someone murmured loudly nearby. "Eleanor Sterling, the one who dumped Andrew Vance at the plaza. No wonder Vance looks like he just swallowed glass." The whispers stabbed Andrew from all sides, but he was numb to them. He simply stared at Elle's back as she seamlessly integrated into a circle of elite European art collectors and Silicon Valley billionaires. She carried herself with effortless supremacy, smiling occasionally, speaking softly. The men around her looked at her with blatant, reverent admiration. At one point, her gaze swept across the room and collided with his for a fraction of a second. And then, her eyes kept moving. Without a pause, without surprise, without anger, without a single flicker of emotion, as if she had looked at a blank wall. Or rather, a speck of dust not worth a microsecond of processing power. That absolute, godlike indifference hurt 1,000 times more than a knife to the gut. Andrew gripped his glass until his knuckles turned white. His heart contracted so violently he almost doubled over. "Drew." Savannah's voice trembled beside him, laced with panic. "What's wrong? Who are you looking at?" She followed his gaze and spotted the woman in black. Savannah's face morphed instantly. Envy, toxic and primal, slithered up her spine and choked her. That dress was clearly custom couture, something she couldn't afford with a year's allowance. The aura Elle projected was something Savannah could never emulate in 100 lifetimes. And the billionaires surrounding Elle possessed enough wealth to buy Savannah's entire existence 10 times over. She dug her acrylic nails into Andrew's arm. "Drew," her voice shook with crushing insecurity. Is that Elle?" Andrew didn't answer. He couldn't even hear her. The only sound in his universe was the deafening pounding of his own heart. Thump. 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 Every beat hammered home the brutal truth. He had lost. He had lost permanently. And the woman he lost was ascending at terminal velocity, transforming into a radiant deity completely out of his reach. Savannah couldn't take it. For the first half of the gala, she had forced herself to smile, clinging to Andrew. But her eyes kept darting back to the woman in black. Elle was the absolute center of gravity. Everywhere she went, power brokers fawned over her. Meanwhile, the space around Savannah was a barren desert. No one approached her. When she tried to insert herself into conversations, the elite wives gave her one freezing look and turned their backs. She stood gripping her drink, her palms sweating. Andrew had disappeared toward the bar. She spotted him standing alone by a marble pillar, his eyes locked onto Elle, his expression as dark and turbulent as a hurricane. Savannah's stomach dropped. Then, she noticed Elle walking away from her circle, heading alone toward a VIP lounge area. Her stride was confident, her stilettos clicking rhythmically, as if the entire world was her runway. A manic thought seized Savannah's brain. She had to go over there. She had to remind Elle that she was the one who ended up with Andrew, that she was the victor. She slammed her glass down and marched toward the lounge. The VIP area was a semi-open alcove, framed by modern sculptures. Elle sat on a white leather sofa, scrolling through an iPad, her long, elegant fingers gliding over the screen. Savannah planted herself directly in front of her. Elle didn't look up. Ellie? Savannah began, forcing her voice into its softest, most cloying register. Tears immediately sprang to her eyes. It's been so long. Elle's fingers paused. She slowly raised her head and looked at Savannah. Her gaze was so completely devoid of temperature it was terrifying. It was like looking at a malfunctioning Roomba that bumped into her foot. Can I help you? Elle said, her tone deadpan. Savannah flinched under the gaze, but forced a pitiful, triumphant smile. She sat down opposite Elle, folding her hands in her lap, adopting the posture of a grieving saint. Ellie, I'm just so glad to see you tonight, she whispered. How have you been? I've been so worried about you. Ever since you ran away, Drew has been a wreck. Elle remained silent, merely raising a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Taking the silence as permission, Savannah pressed on, her voice dripping with venomous sympathy. I know you hate me. You think I stole Drew from you. But Ellie, the heart wants what it wants. Drew's heart only has room for me. I can't control that. But even if you want to get back at him, you shouldn't stoop so low as to work as a glorified event planner here. She paused, scanning Elle's Tom Ford gown with a thinly veiled sneer. Or did you find yourself a wealthy sugar daddy? Ellie, you never used to be this kind of girl. It was a masterclass in passive aggression, feigning concern while deploying lethal insults. She wanted Elle to know that no matter how expensive her dress was, she had still lost the man. Savannah finished her monologue, tilting her chin up slightly, a tear artfully sliding down her cheek. She waited for the explosion. The anger, the shouting, the hysterical catfight. She was ready for it. She was ready for anything, except what actually happened. Elle set the iPad down. She slowly looked up, her gaze raking over Savannah's face, the heavily contoured makeup that couldn't hide her cheapness, the poorly stitched seams of her knockoff dress, her nervously twitching hands. Then, Elle calmly picked up a heavy crystal tumbler of ice water from the table. Before Savannah could even register the movement, Elle flicked her wrist, and the freezing water slammed directly into Savannah's face. The ice water cascaded over Savannah's head, down her nose, over her lips, and seeped into the collar of her dress. Her painstakingly applied 3-hour makeup job instantly dissolved into a muddy disaster. Mascara ran in black rivers, foundation streaked, and lip gloss smeared across her chin. Ah! Savannah shrieked, leaping off the sofa as if electrocuted. Elle stood up. In her stilettos, she towered over Savannah, projecting a physical and psychological dominance that was suffocating. She looked down at the dripping, pathetic mess. Her gaze was as cold as a surgeon's scalpel, no anger, just delivering a clinical verdict. Savannah, Elle began, her voice low, but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. Open your pathetic eyes and look around. Look at whose event this is. Savannah trembled violently. In my eyes, Elle tilted her head slightly, a razor-thin smirk gracing her lips. You and your precious Andrew Vance are nothing more than toxic assets written off the balance sheet. Written off. Get out. Just 2 words. Savannah's knees buckled. She collapsed back onto the sofa, her face chalk white, her lips quivering. She opened her mouth to scream, but her throat clamped shut. Elle's aura crushed her like a glacier, making it physically hard to breathe. Icy water dripped from her chin, ruining her fake dress. The black mascara made her look utterly deranged. Elle didn't spare her another glance. She picked up her iPad, preparing to leave. At that exact moment, heavy, frantic footsteps approached. Andrew had heard Savannah's shriek and rushed in. His eyes first hit the drenched, collapsed Savannah, then snapped to Elle's retreating back. Elle! His voice was harsh and jagged, carrying the repressed agony of 2 months. Don't cross the line. Elle stopped. She turned slowly to face Andrew. He looked terrible, sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, drained of life. But his gaze still held that nauseating, arrogant entitlement. Even at rock bottom, he refused to bow his head. The line? Elle looked at him. Her voice as conversational as if discussing the weather. Are you absolutely sure you want to use that phrase with me? Andrew's chest heaved. He searched her face desperately for a trace of hatred, a trace of lingering attachment, anything from the past he could grab onto. He found nothing. She looked at him like a total stranger, worse than a stranger. A stranger warrants curiosity. To her, he was a blank piece of paper swept away by the wind. Do you think because you found some Wall Street sugar daddy, you can? His sentence was severed by the sound of measured, rhythmic footsteps approaching from behind. The cadence was unhurried, but each step struck the marble floor like a judge's gavel. Andrew whipped around. Julian Pierce stepped into the lounge. Behind him flanked 4 executive protection agents in black suits, exuding lethal, impenetrable professionalism. But Julian's presence dwarfed them all. He wore a dark charcoal suit jacket draped casually over his shoulders. His stride was relaxed but radiated absolute territorial control. His amber eyes swept briefly over Savannah, like one registers a stain on the carpet, before locking entirely onto Elle. He walked directly to Elle and, with fluid, unhesitating naturalness, placed his hand on the small of her back. It wasn't an aggressive gesture of possession. It was an impenetrable shield, a silent declaration to the room. She is under my protection, and no one breathes near her without my permission. Elle stiffened slightly but didn't pull away. Julian's hand was warm and solid. Through the silk of her dress, she felt his heat. She felt his fingers press gently, a silent check-in. Are you okay? Then, Julian slowly turned his head to look at Andrew. He looked down at him, not because of his height though he was taller, but from the innate, terrifying altitude of a true apex predator looking at a bug. His gaze was glacial. No anger, no disdain. Just pure, absolute supremacy. Mr. Vance, Julian began. His voice was low, but every syllable punched through the air like armor-piercing rounds. Show some respect to my fiancé. Fiancé. The word detonated in Andrew's brain like a thermonuclear bomb. His pupils shrank to pinpricks. He looked like he had just been hit by a freight train. His eyes darted wildly between Julian and Elle, from Julian's hand resting on her waist to Elle's calm, serene face. Fiancé. She was Julian Pierce's fiancé. The Julian Pierce. The phantom god of Wall Street. The man who could make Andrew's father beg on his knees. She was his. You. Andrew's lips trembled violently. His voice was a pathetic rasp. That's impossible. Julian ignored his shock entirely. He didn't waste a microsecond looking at Andrew. Instead, he tilted his head toward Elle, his voice dropping to a murmur only she could hear. Are you all right? Elle nodded. Julian then turned his gaze back to Andrew. This time, a new element entered his voice. Not anger. Something vastly more terrifying. Cold, calculated extermination. By the way, Julian stated flatly, effective tomorrow morning, all Vance Group credit lines held by Pierce-affiliated banks will be frozen. Your pledged shares are already sitting at the margin call threshold, aren't they? Julian paused. The corner of his mouth twitched in a microscopic, lethal smirk. I'm initiating a short position on Vance Group. Andrew's knees gave out. The blood literally vanished from his face. His extremities turned to ice. His mind went completely blank. His heart seized, then released with a pain so blinding he nearly collapsed. Shorting Vance Group. With the financial nuclear arsenal of Pierce Capital behind it, this wasn't a threat. It was an execution order. Andrew stared at Elle, pressed against Julian's side. He wanted to lunge at her, grab her hand, scream, ask why. Why did she leave so ruthlessly? Why did she align with his ultimate enemy? Why wouldn't she even give him the dignity of her hatred? But his legs were filled with lead. Because he finally, truly understood. The gap between him and Julian Pierce was not something effort could bridge. It was the gap between an ant and a god. He thought he was at the top of the pyramid, but standing before Julian, he wasn't even on the stairs. And Elle, the woman he treated as a disposable tool, was now standing on the true summit, beside a man Andrew could never hope to touch. Savannah, shivering in the corner, was paralyzed with terror. Seeing Julian's face, she turned gray. She didn't know exactly who he was, but she recognized the suffocating aura of ultimate power. She opened her mouth to call for Andrew, but no sound came out. Julian gave Andrew one final glance, filled with nothing but casual pity. Then he turned and, keeping his hand securely on Elle's back, guided her out of the lounge. Their silhouettes disappeared into the blinding lights of the main hall. Andrew was left alone. His legs finally failed him, and he crashed onto the sofa, looking as if his spine had been ripped out. Cold sweat soaked his custom shirt. His fingers trembled uncontrollably. Savannah crawled over, her wet hand grabbing his sleeve. "Drew, don't touch me!" He violently shoved her away. His voice was an unrecognizable, guttural roar. Savannah scrambled back, sobbing hysterically. But Andrew didn't care. He buried his face in his trembling hands. His heart felt like it was detonating, not because of the margin call, not because of the impending corporate bankruptcy, but because of the way she had looked at him. With complete, absolute, undisturbed indifference. It was infinitely worse than hate. Hate implies you still matter. To her, he was nothing. The next morning, the nightmare became reality. Julian Pierce kept his word. At 9 a.m., right as the bell rang on Wall Street, 3 major banks affiliated with Pierce Capital simultaneously issued notices freezing all Vance Group credit lines, demanding immediate repayment of short-term loans within 30 days. Simultaneously, institutional investors initiated a massive, coordinated dump of Vance Group stock on the secondary market. The attack was precise, overwhelming, and merciless like a scalpel slicing through a jugular vein. 30 minutes into trading, the stock was down 9%. By noon, it plunged 14%. Before the closing bell, the SEC halted trading on the ticker. The financial world exploded. The news that Pierce Capital was shorting Vance Group hit the Bloomberg terminals like a shockwave. Everyone knew what it meant. If Pierce was shorting you, you were marked for death. Andrew had been locked in the boardroom since 9 a.m. The table was buried in margin call notices, legal threats, and liquidity reports. The phones screamed endlessly. "Mr. Vance, Chase is demanding $200 million in additional collateral by Friday. Mr. Vance, 3 major suppliers have halted shipments pending cash in advance confirmation. Mr. Vance, legal says if the stock drops another point when trading resumes, the banks will liquidate the pledged family shares." Every update was a knife to the gut. Andrew sat at the head of the table. His legal pad was blank. His eyes were bruised and sunken, his lips cracked and white. At 4 p.m., the fatal blow arrived. The CFO walked in, his face looking like a corpse. "Mr. Vance, we have a leak. Speak." Pierce Capital's legal division filed a whistleblower report with the SEC this afternoon. The CFO's voice shook. "Regarding accounting irregularities in our corporate art acquisition division," Andrew's head snapped up. "What irregularities?" "Inflated appraisals and undisclosed related party transactions." Sweat poured down the CFO's face. "They allege that for the past 3 years, we've systematically manipulated art valuations to funnel off-book capital. The evidence packet they submitted is bulletproof." Andrew stopped breathing. The art acquisition division. That was Elle's old department. She knew every transaction, every appraisal, every wire transfer. If anyone knew where the bodies were buried, it was her. No, not if. It was her. The illegal funneling was executed by Andrew and his uncle. Elle only handled the legitimate curatorial work, but as the division head, she had to have noticed the shadow ledgers. She knew. She always knew. But while she was with him, she never breathed a word. And now, she had handed the executioner's axe directly to Julian Pierce. Andrew slowly leaned back in his chair, staring up at the harsh fluorescent lights. He suddenly burst into laughter. It was a broken, jagged sound, like coughing up shattered glass. She was brutal. 1,000 times more brutal than he could have ever imagined. She wasn't just getting revenge. She was methodically, surgically, dismantling his entire empire brick by brick. That evening, Richard Vance, lying in his hospital bed, saw the CNN alert about the SEC investigation. The monitor screamed. His blood pressure spiked to 230. The doctors rushed in with the defibrillator. They saved his life, but the right side of his body was paralyzed, a massive stroke. Andrew received the news sitting in the darkened boardroom. The city lights flickered outside. He picked up his phone. A text from his uncle, the vice chairman. "Emergency board vote concluded. Your tenure as CEO is terminated effectively immediately." Andrew stared at the text. He set the phone down carefully, stood up, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. New York City sprawled beneath him, an endless grid of power and light. But as of today, he was no longer part of it. He had been permanently expelled from his own dynasty. And it all started 2 months ago. With one sentence in a ballroom. Marrying her temporarily. Temporary, he whispered, his lips twitching. He rested his forehead against the cold glass. He finally admitted it. Elle wasn't crazy. She wasn't overreacting. He deserved every single second of this agony. He had never been worthy of her. The rain was apocalyptic, as if the sky had ripped open to drown the city. Water smashed against the asphalt, kicking up a blinding white mist. Andrew Vance stood in the torrential downpour outside Elle's West Village brownstone. He didn't know how he found the address. Maybe it was the PI's final report before the checks bounced. Maybe he remembered her mentioning the sycamore trees. He was soaked to the bone. His hair was plastered to his skull. His ruined, bespoke suit covered in street grime. His Italian leather shoes waterlogged. He had been standing there for 40 minutes. A doorman from a neighboring building tried to shoo him away, but he didn't move. Eventually, the doorman gave up. Andrew stood like a shattered gargoyle abandoned in the storm. It was all over. After the trading halt lifted, Vance Group stock gapped down to penny stock territory. Federal agents raided the headquarters, seizing servers. His uncle was appointed acting chairman and immediately threw Andrew under the bus, claiming the fraud was Andrew's rogue operation. His family disowned him. Savannah was gone too. The day his Amex was declined, she packed her bags and vanished without a word, stealing 2 limited-edition Rolexes from his dresser. The irony was suffocating. Every woman in his life left the exact same way. The only difference was Elle left millions in Hermes and diamonds behind as a monument to her pride, while Savannah took everything that wasn't nailed down. He had nothing. No power, no money, no family. Only the freezing rain and the warm light glowing from the 3rd-floor window of Elle's studio. He stared up at the light. The rain washed over his face, mixing with tears he could no longer hold back. His lips were blue, his body shivering violently, but he couldn't feel the cold. The void inside him was infinitely colder. At 7:13 p.m., the light in the window turned off. His heart hammered against his ribs. 5 minutes later, the heavy glass door of the building pushed open. Elle walked out. She wore a classic camel trench coat and held a clear umbrella. Her ankle boots clicked sharply against the wet stone steps. She was looking at her iPhone, typing a quick reply to an email. The moment Andrew saw her, the last of his strength evaporated. His knees buckled, and he collapsed heavily onto the flooded sidewalk, splashing filthy water onto his face. He was on his knees. The rain hammered his skull, washing away the final shreds of his dignity. Hearing the splash, Elle stopped. She looked up. 3 yards away, a man was kneeling in a puddle. His ruined suit clung to his emaciated frame. His face was ghostly pale, his lips blue, but his eyes were a violently bloodshot, desperate red. He looked like a madman who hadn't slept in weeks. Elle stood perfectly still under her umbrella. The rain cascading off the plastic dome created an impenetrable barrier between her world and his. She didn't speak. Elle, Andrew rasped. His voice was completely broken, barely audible over the storm. His Adam's apple bobbed agonizingly. Elle! He crawled forward on his knees, his hands scraping against the rough NYC concrete. His fingers were pruned and white. He looked up at the woman on the steps, rain and tears streaming down his face. I was wrong, he sobbed. I was so wrong. It wasn't a game. In that moment, Andrew Vance's arrogance, his entitlement, his superiority, it all shattered and washed into the gutter. I kicked Savannah out. No, she left. She. He gasped for air. Elle, since the day you left, everything collapsed. I haven't slept. I haven't eaten. I spent 2 months realizing. You were never temporary to me. You were never temporary. He dragged himself closer, his trembling hand reaching out toward the hem of her trench coat. I'm begging you, come back. We can start over. I'll give you the wedding on whatever terms you want. Anything you want, it's yours. Just come back. I can't live without you. Those last 5 words tore from his throat like he was vomiting his own soul. He slumped forward, completely hollowed out. The rain beat down on his neck. He didn't even have the strength to shiver. Elle watched him for a long time. Her expression did not shift a millimeter. There was no anger, no pity, no disgust, not even the sick satisfaction of revenge, just absolute tranquility. Like looking at a closed case file from a past life that no longer concerned her. Then, she moved. She slowly descended the steps. 1, 2, 3 steps. The umbrella remained perfectly steady over her head. She stopped so close to Andrew he could have touched her knee. Elle crouched down. She knelt on one knee in front of him. Even in this position, her spine was straight, her aura sovereign, like a high court judge leaning in to hear a condemned man's final plea. She raised her hand. Her long, elegant fingers lightly touched his filthy, wet cheek. The contact was so gentle that Andrew flinched violently. A blinding flash of hope ignited in his chest. She softened. I won. I can still fix this. But her next words ground his delusions into dust. Andrew. She called his name softly. Her voice cut clearly through the rain. When you stood behind that door and told them you were marrying me temporarily, you sounded so incredibly confident, didn't you? Andrew stopped breathing. Elle's fingers slipped from his cheek, carrying a smudge of street grime. She stared at her fingers, then calmly pulled a tissue from her pocket and wiped them clean. The movement was elegant to the point of cruelty. Thank you for that reminder, by the way, she said quietly. She stood up, looking down at the man groveling in the mud. It allowed me to liquidate all my Vance Group equity at its absolute peak. She gave him one final look. No hate, no love. Just an impenetrable, lethal indifference. The man you are right now isn't even worthy to shine the soles of my boots. She turned around. The umbrella spun slightly, shedding water. Her stride was unbroken, decisive. She walked through the puddles, the streetlights catching the splashing water like shattered diamonds. She didn't look back once. Andrew remained on his knees in the storm. His mouth hung open, his eyes were locked onto her fading silhouette. He wanted to scream, to run, to tackle her and beg, but his body refused to obey him. His life was permanently out of his control. The rain intensified. Elle's silhouette vanished around the corner of the block. Idling silently on the cross street was a black Maybach, its headlights piercing the rain. The rear door pushed open from the inside. A strong, aristocratic hand reached out and firmly took Elle's umbrella as she slid into the cabin. Julian Pierce sat in the back seat. His amber eyes flicked briefly toward the pathetic figure kneeling in the distance, then immediately returned to Elle's face. Handled? Julian asked, his voice low and steady. Elle clicked her seatbelt, leaned back against the plush leather, and exhaled softly. Yes. Julian didn't ask another question. He reached forward and nudged the climate control up 2 degrees. Then, he picked up a Loro Piana cashmere throw and draped it silently over her legs. The heavy car glided smoothly away, disappearing into the neon-lit Manhattan storm. Savannah's demise came faster than anyone anticipated. After Andrew was ruined, or rather, after she abandoned the sinking ship, her life hit a brick wall at terminal velocity. Without Andrew's black card, and without the halo of being a billionaire's fiancé, she plummeted back to reality. She rented a dingy basement apartment in Queens, damp, dark, with mold in the corners. Compared to the penthouse, it was a dungeon, but she refused to accept defeat. The envy was eating her alive. Why did Elle win? Why did Elle get Julian Pierce? Why is the woman I humiliated now sitting on the throne of the city? Driven by manic jealousy, she started calling tabloid reporters. I have dirt on Eleanor Sterling, she whispered frantically into her burner phone. Her scams inside Vance Group. How she manipulated Julian Pierce. Will you pay for an exclusive? The paparazzi were interested, but Savannah didn't realize that 5 minutes after she made the call, the audio recording was already sitting on the desk of Pierce Capital's chief legal officer. Julian's intelligence network was so absolute she couldn't even comprehend it. That same afternoon, before Savannah could meet a single reporter, a team of 6 corporate litigators knocked on her basement door. They didn't bring a cease and desist. They brought a 3-inch thick binder of evidence detailing how Savannah had committed wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement over the last 2 years. Forged checks, fake invoices, maxing out corporate accounts under Andrew's name to the tune of $3 million. Plus, defrauding luxury boutiques by borrowing jewelry as the future Mrs. Vance and never returning it. Every charge was backed by bank statements, IP logs, and HD surveillance footage. It was a flawless kill shot. When Savannah saw the documents, her face turned green, then dead gray. "You! This is slander!" she shrieked hysterically. "It's fake! Elle sent you to ruin me!" "Miss!" Savannah, the lead attorney said flawlessly, ignoring her outburst. "These files have already been submitted to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. We highly recommend you retain criminal defense counsel." That evening, 2 NYPD detectives and windbreakers arrived at the basement. As they cuffed her, Savannah practically lost her mind. She was dragged out of the moldy hallway, thrashing and screaming, "Elle, you destroyed me! Damn you to hell!" Her screams echoed down the stairwell like the dying shrieks of a feral animal. No one cared. That same night, every major news network led with the grand opening of the Miami Global Arts Hub. In its first week, transaction volume exceeded $10 billion. On the Bloomberg screens, Elle stood at the podium of a historic auction house, wearing a crisp white blazer. She was radiant, commanding, and serene. Julian Pierce stood one step behind her, his eyes locked onto her with terrifying focus. The contrast between the goddess on the screen and the screaming, smeared makeup fraudster in the back of an NYPD cruiser was the most poetic irony in the world. 3 months later, at the global art industry's premiere gala at Lincoln Center, Eleanor Sterling was nominated for, and won, the Global Curator of the Year award for her unprecedented triumph with the Miami Hub. It was the highest honor in the field. Previous winners were industry titans with decades of experience. At 30, she was the youngest laureate in the award's history. The ceremony was held in the Grand Theater, under a ceiling painted with Renaissance frescoes and crystal chandeliers glowing like galaxies. The audience wasn't just local socialites, but the apex predators of global culture and finance. Elle stood on stage. She wore a minimalist black column dress, devoid of heavy jewelry, save for a single vintage pearl earring and a geometric silver brooch. Clean. Pure. But in the spotlight, she radiated a luminescence that didn't come from diamonds or designer tags. It came from a woman who had conquered her universe, emitting an unbreakable inner peace and supreme confidence. In the front row sat Julian Pierce. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo, his posture relaxed but his focus absolute. From the moment Elle walked on stage, he never looked away. In his amber eyes was a deep, unmasked pride. Not the possessive pride of, "This is my property," but pure, profound reverence. She deserves the entire world. After the ceremony, they stood together on the private rooftop terrace of Lincoln Center. The crisp night wind swept off the Hudson River. The Manhattan skyline sprawled beneath them like a carpet of crushed diamonds. From the ballroom below, the faint, melodic notes of a grand piano drifted upward. Elle leaned against the glass parapet, holding the heavy crystal award. In the moonlight, the glass base glowed with a faint blue light. Julian approached from behind. His footsteps were silent, but Elle felt his gravity instantly. She didn't turn around. A soft, genuine smile played on her lips. He stepped up right behind her, his arms wrapping naturally around her waist. Not too tight, not too loose, just enough for her to lean back against his solid chest without feeling caged. "Cold?" he asked. His chin rested lightly on the top of her head, his low rumble vibrating against her. No. They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments. Then, Julian reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a small, black velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't orchestrate a flashy spectacle. He simply held the box in front of her and popped it open with his thumb. Inside was a ring. Not an obnoxious, blinding diamond meant to flex wealth. It was a minimalist, flawless platinum band holding a single, impeccably cut, deep blue sapphire. It pulsed quietly in the dark, like a captured star. "Elle," he murmured. Elle turned in his arms and looked up at him. The moonlight washed over his sharp features, making his amber eyes look transparent and incredibly tender. She had never seen this look in any man's eyes. No possessiveness, no condescension, no unspoken demand that she owe him her life. Only equal, sincere, bottomless devotion. "In my empire," Julian said, his voice deep, gravelly, and absolute. "Having weighed every syllable 1,000 times, there will always be a throne for you." Elle looked at him. then at the quiet sapphire in the box. She remembered that rainy night at the rehearsal, the heavy 6-carat diamond, the cruel mockery, the bone-chilling cold. It felt like an eternity ago, belonging to a different lifetime. She raised her left hand. The faint tan line on her ring finger had vanished entirely. Julian slipped the ring onto her finger. The heat of his skin brushed hers for a fleeting second. Elle looked down at the quiet blue sapphire catching the moonlight. She smiled. Not a polite society smile, but a radiant, slightly mischievous, soul-deep smile, like the first blossom breaking through the snow. She reached up and took his hand. "Okay," she whispered. The wind blew past them, fluttering the hem of her dress, carrying away the last ghosts of her past. The city breathed quietly beneath their feet. She was finally standing on the absolute summit, not because of the man holding her, but because she had climbed there herself.